I have another huge update for my A8611 restoration or resto mod project Cream Puff. The last couple of videos I've been working on installing the Just Engineering street style angle kit or front end kit, as well as installing a Celica super rear axle into the car using a Just Engineering swap link kit. My focus has been trying to get it on the ground and making it roll, but now in this video, we're making some progress on making it go. I got a couple of big packages from Panic made: wiring harness, ECU, and ITBs.
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, it's finally here. Oh, ho, ho, ho. Oh, ho, ho. Yeah. Got connectors and sensors and stickers and things. We got a nice big old bundle of wiring here. Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful looking harness. And then what's in this guy? Oh. All right. Bum, 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 bum. More stickers. We have the tachometer. Oops, we got the tachometer resistor. I'm gonna set that right there. Got USB cable for the ECU. We got another harness dealio. I'm not sure what that's for yet. And 3-wire temp sensor. This looks like an intake. There we go. This looks like an intake air temp sensor. And then additional connectors for things. Yay!
On my drift car, I did all the wiring myself, which is fine, but it took a lot of time, and I just don't have the luxury of having that kind of time to do it myself again. Plus, honestly, Panic Made's quality is arguably better than the quality of the harness I have in my drift car. Don't get me wrong, it works just fine, but Panic really does a great job of how they route everything, all new wires, connectors, all that good stuff. I opted to go with Panic because the quality is better, or because the quality is top-notch, and they offer really good pricing, and they support the Beams community. They've been a part of the Beams community for a long time. They drive Beams cars, they've done Beam swaps, they've offered all kinds of great information to the community. They're just a couple of good dudes that they're a part of the community, so I want to support them. They also do a great job of packaging with ECU, wiring harness, all the sensors you need, everything. And then recently they started making hard parts like the ITBs I got, and other things like rear axle shafts. I'll go over the install of the ITBs in a few minutes, but I also did a comparison of the Panic Made ITBs to the 4AG 20 valve ITBs that most people put on Beams, and I'll put that, there should be a card popping up somewhere. Click on that and that'll take you to that video of the comparison. Some of the stuff that Panic does a really good job of their wiring is they package everything you saw with the sensors and things that you need, which are also some upgraded sensors. Their harnesses they offer in a couple of different configurations. Mine is the universal harness because my wiring, I'm still sorting out the chassis wiring, the dash harness and the front harness. I've got a couple of different mismatched things that I need to do some repairs on. So what they did is they shipped me a universal harness. So that uses a pigtail like this guy that I'll wire in all of my stuff to from the car. But they also offer plug and play harnesses for any combination of Kuki, Zenki, GTS, SR5, whatever 8.6s. They've been working with Link ECU for a while to help develop the platform or develop the support for the Beams, so their harnesses are packaged with a Link ECU. And Link has a ton of tuner support anyway, so usually the first step of selecting an ECU is choosing a tuner. But in this case, Link has a really good network of tuners as well as a ton of support for the Beams, so that was a no-brainer using a Link ECU. Typically, most people use a Monsoon ECU. The Link Monsoon is a It's a more budget-friendly ECU that has all of the inputs and outputs you need to run a drive-by cable beams, but mine, I wanted a few extra features, so I needed some additional inputs and outputs. And that's why I went with the Link Fury X ECU. Bundled with the harness and the ECU, we've got all the sensors. Like, I've got a wideband sensor already. You know, this is the intake air temp sensor. This is an upgraded coolant temp sensor. So we'll go install that in a minute. I'll explain why it's an upgrade. Also, because I have a bunch of additional inputs and outputs, they sent me a bunch of connectors so I can get that set up as well. This is that pigtail to go plug this into, or wire this into my car for the universal setup. USB cable. Also the tachometer resistor. If you're going to be using the stock A86 cluster, this is what you need. I'm using a digital cluster, so I haven't quite figured out how the tach is going to work yet. I still got to figure that out. They also send us some sweet stickers and all kinds of neat stuff. This is actually a magnet, so pretty stoked about that. The Fury X ECU is great for what I need because this car is going to be more, it's a restoration or a resto mod. So it's a restoration modification. I wanted to modernize a bunch of the tech. I want to be able to have things like cruise control and drive-by-wire for cruise control, as well as air conditioning and stuff like that. So I wanted to have all these extra features. And the Fury X is technically a V6 ECU, but you can reconfigure the inputs and outputs, the extra inputs and outputs that the V6 uses for these extra features just on a 4-cylinder. So like the ignition coil or the injectors can be reconfigured for like the drive-by-wire motor. Like I said earlier, normally the first step of choosing an ECU is talking to your tuner or finding a tuner. I've been doing beam stuff long enough that I kind of already had that figured out. So just a few little tidbits for you if you're watching this and you're wondering what ECU to get for your beams. AEM is pretty much out. They don't offer any ECU that has the cam and crank trigger configuration built in. They'll ask you to modify the trigger wheels and other stuff that to me, that's a no-go. I want to be able to use the stock stuff. There's other options, like a lot of people ask about Mega Squirt. Personally, I'm not a fan of Mega Squirt. The ECUs themselves have a really small table size for your ignition and fuel mapping. And when you start adding things like dual variable valve timing, those may not be big enough, and your tuner will have to pick and choose which points are better to extrapolate between, and so it just won't run as well as something that has a larger table size for that. The other thing with Mega Squirt is it's normally appealing because it's a budget-friendly option, but when you start adding things like dual variable valve timing, it doesn't end up being as much as budget-friendly because you got to have additional things added to the Mega Squirt that aren't a part of their base configuration. Another thing for me with Mega Squirt is they have a free software, but it doesn't allow you to do certain things, and so you have to pay to unlock the full software to be able to do certain things on your own, and these are things that are normally free with pretty much any other ECU in that market. All right, let's go install the ITBs. All right, step one of installing the Panic Beams ITBs. I got to pull the whole intake. I also pulled this bit off here so I could clean it up because it's pretty dirty, and you got to clean that up so that way you can get a good gasket seal on the adapter. So I've got that pulled off, and I've started disassembling the ITBs because you got to bolt the adapter plate on first, then the ITBs. So that's what we're doing now. All right, ITBs are all disassembled now. We're gonna go put some gasket maker on there and then put the adapter plate on. Man, that's beautiful. Now, ideally with this, you're just gonna put a little bit on. It said 1 millimeter, and I don't have a nozzle on this, so I'm gonna have to clean off quite a bit after. Yeah, because I'm putting way more than 1 millimeter on. This is where things are gonna get a little bit tricky. So this last bolt goes right back here. You gotta start it by hand, really, really tight in here. And then once you have it most of the way tight, you grab a 10 millimeter wrench. Okay, that's tight. Now we're gonna tighten the rest down. I'm gonna wipe out all the extra silicone that I put on because I put on way too much. Now we're gonna go ahead and toss the ITBs on here, starting with the one that has the throttle on it, or the throttle spring. Whether that's front or back will depend on what kit you ordered.
And the last step, bolting on the velocity stacks. Ta-da!
Since the ITBs are installed, now we can check out some of the harness things. I have it mostly routed, but I still have some things I gotta, figure out where things are going. But we'll take a look and I'll show you why I think their harnesses are so awesome. If you're familiar with how the stock harness is routed on this, you'll notice immediately there's a huge difference. The stock harness it goes across the front here. You don't have that anymore with the Panic harness, so that's super awesome. All of the routing for everything on top of the head and over on this side of the engine, it comes from the back of the head. So the harness comes from over here, goes up the back, and comes forward. So it's just, everything is hidden really nicely, and I love that. You got our injectors, our ignition coil, everything. We run up here and over to this side. It's done really, really well. The stock coolant temp sensor is a 2-wire sensor. So, and that works, the 2-wire works well for the stock ECU and stock instrument cluster, but when it comes down to swapping in something, that isn't going to work. The 2-wire sensor, what it does is it goes straight from here to the stock ECU, and the stock ECU sends it out to the cluster. The way that the Panic 3-wire sensor works is it sends out, the 2 to the standalone ECU or the stock ECU if you're still on the stock ECU, and then the other port goes to the instrument cluster for the AE86. So the stock AE86 instrument cluster just uses 1 wire for it, and it grounds it through the block. So this way, using this upgrade sensor, it allows me to run the stock cluster. I do have a couple of extra connectors here on this side, so these are more inputs and outputs that I can set up. And then this guy, I think this is going to go down here to the oil pressure sensor, all the way down here at the bottom. So let's see if I can plug that in real quick here. There we go. Now it's going to take me a little bit to get the drive-by-wire sorted out. So what I'm doing for the drive-by-wire with the ITBs is I'm running a BMW throttle motor out of an M3 that uses ITBs, this guy. But it's going to take me a little to figure out. I need to see how I'm going to mount it. I might have to build a different linkage for it. And so that's going to take me some time. It might take me a year until I get this done, but I still wanted to drive the car in the meantime. So Panic did some extra things for me that I really appreciated. They helped me get a few things sorted on this so I could just be able to run it in the meantime. This is where the mess of wiring is that I haven't quite gotten situated yet, but this is where it plugs into the ECU. It even has a DLC, data link connector, OBD2 port. And then this is my universal plug. This is where that's going to go from the chassis whenever I end up wiring that. But I still needed a way to control idle, and that's what we're doing with this. This is a 4AG 20 valve idle air control valve. I think anybody who doesn't run an idle air control valve is kind of crazy on a drive-by cable setup. So this is what's going to control the idle until we get the drive-by wire set up. This is where I still have to sort out the wiring. I don't have everything on the car yet, so like I'm missing the alternator. And that's going to go right here. So the wiring for the alternator, the wiring for the alternator still needs to get sorted, and a couple other things that I still have to figure out. Like this is for the drive-by-wire motor. Some of this goes back to the transmission because I need to have the sensors plugged in for the vehicle speed sensor as well as for like the reverse lights. So some of this goes back that way. It's kind of a mess, a little bit of a jumble, just because I don't have it all figured out yet. But I'm just super duper excited that I'm this close. I need to, finish going through all this wiring, getting it hooked up. I need to put a radiator in. I need to repair the front lighting harness, the chassis harness there, and I also need to repair my dash harness. But that's pretty much it. That and brakes, and I think after that, this car will be ready to drive. I'm gonna go get it tuned. I know I'm probably forgetting a million other little things, so. Panic made harness, good stuff. Panic made ITBs, awesome. I'm super stoked on this. Like, honestly, top-notch quality stuff. Super helpful dudes. They were able to help me sort out some stuff that I had questions on. They were able to help me pick the right ECU. It really took a lot of the stress out of the build of me trying to research a bunch of stuff myself. Since they deal with this stuff day in and day out, it just made things really easy for me. If you're not confident in your wiring, or if you want to get a real nice high quality wiring harness for your beam swap, I highly recommend getting in touch with Panic Made. They do have a waiting list, so make sure you contact them sooner rather than later. And then when your number's up, your number's up. I want to say I waited about 6 months for mine, so definitely get in touch with them sooner rather than later. It wasn't until like my name was up until I had to know what wiring I needed, all the extra things, you know, so you've got time once you get your engine and you get on the wait list, you've got those months to figure out how you want things done, what wiring harnesses you have, and all that stuff. Yeah.